for right now.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. No, and I think you'll be able to, I mean, you'll definitely have the ability to add in those additional children, while those new clients are receiving services.
Yeah.
I don't think you're limited when you say no at this point. But yeah, just trying to think of all the other scenarios. So
yeah, definitely.
Okay. That's all. That's the only question I had, Jason.
Perfect. Okay, moving on. Process phone logs when status is scheduled for intake. As a direct care staff member, I need to be able to process an intake for a parent / guardian and child if the status of the phone log becomes scheduled for intake. The definition of done says the intake process is comprised of demographic updates for existing children and guardians, multiple assessments, and a release form. Updates to the guardian information include basic demographic updates, occupation, etc. This must be tracked in the parent record, or a parent record must be created if the guardian is new. Updates to the child information include any medication changes, diagnosis information, or any special case notes. This must be tracked on a child record, or a child record must be created if the child is new. Updates to basic contact information, including emergency contact info and who is authorized to pick up the child. This must be tracked on a child record. The release form requires parent, guardian, and signature. Electronic signature should be allowed. Intake packet must be completed in person at the crisis nursery locations. So the way that this is written says that the phone log should be scheduled for intake. Does that mean that the person answering the call processes the phone log, or is somebody else at the nursery responsible for identifying all the phone logs that are scheduled for intake and then processing it? So is there a handoff of any kind or anything like that?
Yeah, so again, this is where it's going to take a little bit of thinking, because the way that we usually do it now is that, so essentially if the person that's taking the actual phone log is qualified to make decisions about who can be scheduled for intake, they can go ahead and make that decision. And so then they can go ahead and enter in like scheduled or waitlist. However, a lot of times the person taking that phone call is not the one that's able to make that decision. So our parents are notified that they'll get a call back within 15 minutes, letting them know like the status of their request. Now, obviously, we don't do that if it's like somebody that's suicidal on the phone or like in immediate danger, then we would just have them stay on the phone while we get a supervisor. But in most cases, then that person who took the phone log is contacting a supervisor, finding out what the status of the phone log should be, and then calling that parent back. And since most of the time in reality, what's happening is we're writing these down, we don't ever have like a status for phone logs before they are either scheduled or waitlisted. Does that make sense?
So how do you get in contact with the supervisor?
Call them or ask them if they are on site. So that's where it's going to be a little bit tricky if we're taking the phone log directly into the computer, because there could be kind of that lag time of like 10 to 15 minutes where you have all of this information sitting here in a phone log, but that phone log hasn't been classified yet because we haven't gotten a supervisor response on it.
Okay.
Yeah, probably definitely want, never mind. Does Magentrix have an autosave option, Jason, or is it similar to Salesforce?
What do you mean autosave?
So, Salesforce, you have to click save. Otherwise, if something happens in those, 10 or 15 minutes and you get logged out or...
Yeah, it's the same as Salesforce.
Okay. So what I'm thinking, I just wanted to bring that up because we've had other clients ask, because there's no autosave function. So people taking in the phone log will want to save immediately. And I think a waiting for supervisor could work, but I'll let you decide. But I think, while they're waiting to get that response, they'll definitely want to save and make sure that that information's locked in there. but then they'll easily be able to, you know, open it back up and edit it.
Well, and we do have, we do have a pending status for, like, if we contacted a supervisor and then we tried to call the parent back and we couldn't get a hold of them, we use pending for that status, but it might be confusing if we were, like, pending and waiting for supervisor, because pending ones usually mean that, like I said, like we tried calling that parent back and we couldn't get a hold of them. We also use it for somebody that calls, but they're not, like, entirely sure they want care. So it does seem like maybe a waiting for supervisor kind of status would be most appropriate to help differentiate it from those other ones.
Could we also differentiate by adding a little bit more detail to pending and maybe making a waiting for client status and a waiting for supervisor status?
Yeah, that could work, I think.
The only reason I say it is, and again, this is your decision, but the pending can mean a whole lot of things, and it's more about people getting confused. The other thing that, at least from a training and implementation standpoint, if pending is what people are used to seeing, it's harder to train on like a new or different process because they see it and they just put them in pending, even if it's waiting for supervisor or anything like that. So adding a little bit more clarity may be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll have to talk with Molly some more about it too, because pending has kind of been a catch-all for us. And I don't know if we kind of like that it's a catch-all, or if we would prefer to have it more defined, I guess. Because we get a lot of, like, random things that are just like, we're waiting for, you know, a doctor to fax something over, or this parent called and they're having a surgery next week, but they don't know the day yet, or I don't know. It can be just a lot of weird different things.
Yeah.
Would you mind following up with Molly to see, to kind of chat through that, if you guys like the pending catch-all or if you want to add more detailed options?
Sure, I'll check with her. She'll be back in tomorrow.
Can you mark that as an action item, Maddie, just so we can?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Is there any kind of report or notification that would be helpful or be needed in terms of a requirement here for supervisors to be notified if there are things waiting for them?
I don't think so.
Okay. If you're questioning that, the way that I read this and the way that you described the 15-minute time period seems like it would be most efficient to handle that by walking over and talking to them if they're on site.
Yeah, we don't want people, like, putting things there and just thinking, like, oh, it's the supervisor's responsibility to find that. Like, the person who took the phone log is responsible for getting in touch with a supervisor and getting back to that parent ASAP. That is their job.
Okay. Maddie, I would even make a note of that, to add that to the definition of done, that we don't want any kind of notification or email just to enforce the fact that it needs to be a rapid in-person or over-the-phone response. So this story is related more to, like, the processing of the phone logs, and I know we have a lot more to cover in terms of the intake packet in future sprints. I don't think the intake packet is part of this sprint even, but just some questions that may help us make informed decisions as we build out, like, the transition. Is the entire intake packet completed with each trip for repeat users of the nursery care?
Yes.
Okay. So let me reread this. So it's comprised of demographic updates, which you do every time, It's comprised of like children updates, emergency contact updates, and the release forms.
Yes.
Perfect.
And all the assessments, everything we do every time.
Okay, perfect.
Our family, so much changes with them from intake to intake that it's important that we do that each time.
Perfect. Okay. And then again, this will help inform a lot of our decisions, but part of this is the very start of when we're talking about signatures, and just curious if you captured signatures on paper for whatever reason. Again, we haven't covered much of the signatures, but if they are captured on paper for whatever reason, do you have equipment in the nurseries to scan those signatures and attach them?
Some of them.
Some of the nurseries do.
Yes. Some of them, like their closest spot to scan is going to be like on a different floor or an adjacent building. So this is something that we would work on before we implement the database.
Okay. And this could get us down a rabbit hole, so I will try to avoid that as best as possible. Do your staff currently have access to log into your current system on any personal devices? So like on their phones if they wanted to?
No.
They don't have the ability to?
No.
Okay.
Access is limited to the IP address of the computers at the site.
And is that something that you would want to continue to implement?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so then that I was going to ask about essentially like mobile scanning, so basically scanning it with your phone. But if that's off the table if we're going to limit access to the desktop.
No, that's not something we want to do.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is, I think, actually going to spark quite a bit of discussion. What point is the phone log assigned to a location where the intake is going to happen, and who does that?
So, yes. So this is, again, where it gets a little bit tricky. So initially within that 15 minutes, if the supervisor comes back and says, yes, let's go ahead and schedule them, at that point, it's going to be assigned to that location for intake. If the supervisor says that we're going to put them on the wait list, then they'll go on the wait list, but there will be like a notation next to them saying what all locations they're willing to go to. And so the idea of the dashboard, which I know we're getting to at some point, is that somebody at our north location can say, we have this space open, all the families on our wait list are green level, so they're not as severe. Let me peek at Centene's list and see if there's anybody there that I want to bring in. So then after they would call and offer a family on Centene's list an intake time at the North Nursery, that's when they would schedule them to North. So it can either happen, you know, at that first 15-minute check-in with a super, or if that family's on the nursery's wait list, they're not going to be assigned for an location until they're actually set up for an intake.
So it would be somebody at that other nursery seeing that there's a family in greater need on a wait list in which they're marked as an acceptable location?
Yes.
Okay. And you always admit by that color scale?
Primarily. There's so much that goes into it, but I mean, we don't have a whole lot of those red level families. So yes, essentially, if we've got a red level family in the city, we're going to bring them into the first location with space.
So I guess the reason I don't need to know like the secret sauce about you admit, but the reason that I ask is mostly like you mentioned, let's say the St. Charles location has a wait list, but they're all green families. And then somebody calls into Wentzville and they're categorized as a yellow family. And they say they'd be willing to go to the St. Charles location. Would the St. Charles location pick that Wentzville family up first before they tended their own wait list.
Yes, and ideally what happens is the Winslow person that's taking that phone log, when they call the supervisor and the supervisor says we don't have space, that Winslow person is also going to pick up the phone and call over to the singles nursery and say, hey, I've got this phone call. Do you guys have space? They said they're willing to go there. So like ideally that intake person is doing the legwork of like finding out if other nurseries have space at that time.
When you say intake person, you're saying the person who answers that call.
Yes, the person who answered the call.
So I'm jumping here, but jumping to that wait list report or dashboard or whatever, available nurseries dashboard, everybody would need access to that, not just supervisors, correct?
Yes, everybody would need access to that.
So,
and it still is important to us that we have families assigned to like a wait list application. So I don't think at this point in time that we want like one master wait list that has everybody's like zip codes and where they're willing to go.
You still want a wait list by location?
Yes.
Okay. I'm trying not to get too far into this wait list thing.
Sorry, we can talk about it more later, or if you think that's completely crazy and you think we should just have one big long wait list, we could entertain that idea. It's just really different for us.
No, it's a story on here, actually. It's 17. So it's something
okay.
we'll be tackling this sprint. I think in terms of the other questions that I have in relation to this are, sorry, I need to mute for 1 second. The dogs are going to go crazy.
I wish I knew what his other questions were. Yeah, I think we can definitely accommodate the wait list by location. I don't think there's any need to change the way you all do that to fit the system.
Well, and to be honest, part of the challenge with all of this too is that eventually, like one of our dreams as an agency is to move to a centralized call center. So all the phone calls are coming into one spot and then are getting out, but it's going to be really difficult to get there, and we don't have the capacity to do that just yet. So trying to think about like something that works for us now, but something that should we move more towards that model would also be able to accommodate that.
Yeah.
Sorry,
so, and some of that, like, it's just, we started with one location. And so how much of what we're doing now is because it's the best way to do it, and how much of what we're doing now is because that's how we've always done it.
Right.
So I think it's just a lot of questions that as an agency we're starting to look at the same time that we're building the database. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Jason, did you catch the part where she said, like, ideally they'd like to move to a centralized call center to take in this process call?
Yeah.
Good.
That would be awesome.
That's probably like a 5 to 10 year plan.
Sure. But it's great to keep in mind now. We want to make sure, that we're setting up for that.
Okay. I was just saying that most of my additional questions have to do with the story 17 down there.
Okay.
So I think we're good to move on, unless, Maddie, you have any questions. Any other questions about this, like scheduling?
No, I actually thought you were going to say that, but I wasn't sure, so I didn't want to move on because I thought you had more questions. So that's great.
Can I mention, and if it's not part of these stories, just let me know. But I know on that very first one, and then on this one too, we talked about like the different statuses of the phone logs. Do you guys feel like you have a good idea of like what the different statuses that we use are, and like how we want those to convert automatically?
That's a great. So
in here somewhere,
it's in the first story in the definition of done. We have statuses include waitlist, scheduled for intake, pending, closed / crisis resolved. So, and then the only other note we have is closed and crisis resolved. Oh, I'm sorry. Closed, crisis resolved, and scheduled for intake are final statuses.
Okay, so I think as I was thinking about this, scheduled for intake is not a final status for phone logs, at least how we do it now. The final status for phone logs is like once the child's not at the nursery anymore, when we close out the phone log, and it disappears like off of our list. And so at that point, we do discharged or discharged after wait list. I don't know if we would have to have like the distinction of waitlist. Like for right now, that's tracking. Like we need that for tracking purposes to show how many of our families we admitted after they were on the wait list. But I would imagine within the new system, we should be able to report on like how many total people were on our wait list at some point, how many of them got care, how many didn't, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think,
Okay.
And it might be a good idea to add in some date fields too. So the date they were added to waitlist, the date that they were scheduled for intake. So yeah, you're actually capturing that point in time as well.
Okay. And then can we add another final status of discharged, or do we not even need that because the system will capture that for us? Like, will it automatically, the phone log will automatically go away from that dashboard? I guess that's more of a dashboard question. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure where to kind of add that question.
No, I think that's a great question, and I think I'm still wrapping my head around it too. So, so when a phone log comes in, you're saying that phone log is open until like throughout their stay.
Yeah, and then it's closed after they leave.
Got it.
So, and again, I don't know if we've been doing it that way because it's the way that works with the SharePoint system we use, but essentially like the life cycle of a phone log is that it's going to go possibly from waitlist to scheduled after waitlist to I guess, what do we call them? Admitted or admitted after waitlist. And then after they're discharged after waitlist. Or it could be scheduled and then admitted and then discharged. So it kind of like, it goes through a life cycle and we have to manually switch it over each time. But again, I don't know if that's just for reporting purposes. Like if we can make all of that happen and be able to report on everything with like, without having to change those statuses all the time, that's fine.
So I guess what the important question is you mentioned you weren't sure if that's something that you've been doing because of the way that your system is built, the SharePoint system. I would say it's a little bit strange to keep the phone log, which is like the record of the initial conversation, open until after they've been discharged. It almost feels like that there's the need for a record of their stay that is separate from the initial phone log. Is that something that we can explore, or would you prefer just to keep it the same?
I think the reason we like the phone log staying open is that it's really easy for me as a supervisor. Like I'm not at Wentzville today, but I can easily pop on their site and see like, oh, they have 10 kids there today. Let me look at their phone logs. Here's why these kids are here. Here's why these kids are here. Here's why these ones are here. These are the 3 families that are still on the wait list. Here's what they're on the wait list for. So it's a really easy way for us to know at any given time why kids are in the nursery and like what the presenting crisis was. It's also really easy for like our art therapist to look at or our family empowerment person to say, oh, one of my families is using the nursery. Let me see why, without having to like pull up all of their intake records.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of gives that snapshot of why the family's there, which is why we wanted that dashboard. But again, if you can think of an easier way to just have like in one spot a really quick snapshot of like what's going on with the family that's in care, I think that would be okay.
I think taking it a step back, I do always like the idea of statuses being updated automatically. So there's something in the system that's triggering them to move from waitlist to scheduled for intake. So, when you put in the date that they're scheduled for intake, the status will automatically update. And it could be the same thing when a discharge date is populated, that the phone log can be updated to discharge. So and maybe we need to have a design discussion about this as well. But if statuses are being updated automatically, I'm thinking I do not have a problem with them staying open until the children are discharged. So I'm waiting for Jason to chime in and tell me something else, but those are my thoughts.
I have to think about it.
Okay.
I definitely don't disagree with anything that you said. I would say that we definitely want to make sure that we try to update things as automated as we can get without challenging the integrity of the data, because it's always hard to keep things in sync. And
we love that. I mean, because right now we know for a fact that some families fall through the cracks of getting counted as waitlist because somebody moves them from waitlist to just admitted instead of admitted after waitlist. So then it's not tracking correctly. So we love the idea of the automation. I think the thing we might struggle with is the phone logs not staying open the whole time.
Yeah.
If the kids are there.
And I definitely would not be saying that we're gonna close out the phone log when they're either waitlisted or scheduled or anything like that. What's going through my head is a little bit different of a design approach than that, which is just basically keeping all that record that you talked about with the reason why they're staying and who's on the wait list and everything like that, just in a little bit different of a data structure. But again, I have to think about it. I wouldn't remove anything that you currently have. It's just a matter of accessing it and making sure that it's as easy as it possibly can be to be reportable.
Sure.
And it doesn't cloud what you're looking at. So we have all the requirements. I think it's just a matter of coming up with a design, and that's what we're here for. So, yeah, I don't want to make it seem like we're talking about taking away any functionality like that. It's
really
just the best way to implement the functionality that you're telling us about.
Sure. Well, and again, I think that's what we're definitely trusting you guys with, because like I said, a lot of the things that we do, we're fully aware that we do them because it's the way that we have to be able to report on things in our current system. And so I don't think we're opposed to new ways of doing things as long as we can still access the same information that we need.
Sure. Okay. I think we left off on 14. Which is the historical phone log tracking on past guardians. This story says, as a direct care staff member, I need the ability to track historical phone logs on past guardians. So we don't have a definition of done. Is this a reporting / dashboarding requirement, or just a list view requirement? And if you recall list views, we demoed them in Sprint 1, which is just a basic way of slicing up the data. So is it just something that you would need to see in a report, or would you just click a little drop down that shows you previous phone logs?
Sorry, can you say that again? My phone was beeping at me and I was looking at it to make sure it wasn't the direct care team calling. I'm sorry.
No problem. Do you recall us showing list views in the demo last week? Correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. The question is this a reporting and dashboarding requirement, or just a list view requirement? So the list view, you can set it up to show you just all phone logs that are older than today, and you can kind of search it and sort it on the names like we showed you with the little alphabet bar, or by typing in the name, Or is this something where we needed a more complex report where we need to bring in maybe multiple date filters or maybe even onto a dashboard?
So can I tell you what we want to use it for, and then you tell me which one it sounds like it would be better to have?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so essentially there are two ways that we would use this. One being if we have somebody call and they give us like very little info and we're like, man, that name's really familiar. We think they've used us before. Like recently for something else, we want to be able to put their name in and yes, be a list of all the previous stays they've had and be really easily able to click on those old phone logs to see why they were here before. The other thing we would want to be able to do is if we have like the children's division get in contact with us for some reason and say, we want to see your records on this family from, you know, October 2013 to October 2014. Like we want to be able to quickly search for those things too.
Maddie, do you think that sounds like list views and related lists, or?
You're definitely going to be able, if you're searching for the person, a list view would suffice, I think, of seeing just what their previous phone logs were. If it is for something like the children's division where you kind of want to control, I guess, maybe what fields they're seeing, I can see that, but that would be a report that you would probably want to create separately so you can filter on the specific family and set in those, you know, whatever time frame they're looking for.
And sorry. And with the list view, now we would have the ability on that too. Like if Laura had a funder that really wanted to fund, you know, supporting families with substance abuse prevention or substance abuse issues, would we be able to really easily like just say, oh, we want to look up all the phone logs for families who have had substance abuse issues?
That's probably easier to pull in a report.
Yes.
Just because you can really quickly filter things and see your results, and you can manipulate the data easier in a report than a list view. A list view would be something as like kind of what Maddie described. If you hear a name and you think, man, that I feel like they've been in for, or they've called us before for something, and you just want to search all phone logs to see the name, creating a report for that doesn't necessarily make sense, because you're not necessarily, if you think Angela Smith sounds familiar, you just want to type in Angela Smith one time, and you don't necessarily ever want to go back and view that again.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about, you know, very specific reports that Laura needs to pull, I'm not sure that would be something that we want to train Laura to be able to do on her own. It wouldn't necessarily be a requirement that we build something along those lines. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, so I think Maddie, this one we can just put together some list views and do like when we start building out the phone log, we can show how it looks on related lists and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can just use that for now. And if we need to do something more complex, we can revisit that later. Okay,
sounds good.
And then the only other thing that I have on here, it's not really a question, but we in our pricing estimates that we gave certain estimates for, you know, growing the system, and as the system grows, you collect more data, and it requires more data storage. And we projected some numbers in there for your data storage to grow and expand in the pricing each year. How far, and you don't have to give me a final answer or anything right now, but do you guys ever archive any data, or do you have everything that you've ever done all in one place?
So because we've changed systems a couple of times, we essentially, like, we have all of our electronic data from when we started using the system in 2013. Is that the answer you're looking for? I mean, like our hard copy files, we store and like archive and then shred after 7 years. But our electronic files, I don't know that we have like a system in place for those. I mean, with SharePoint, we obviously have them in those weird semi-archived folders for storage reasons.
Yeah, I've seen those. Okay, no, that's good. Again, we don't have to talk about it now. It may be something that we want to revisit when we go live, just to kind of talk through what kind of data you need easy access to or anything like that, and what your expectation of if somebody did use, let's say in terms of the 7 years, let's say somebody used you 7 years ago, then has another kid, would there be the expectation of continuum of consistent information, or would you take new information, etc.? So that's something that we can talk about later. I was just curious on what your guys' strategies were right now.
Yeah, we don't have a good enough system that we've used for long enough to really have a strategy for that, I don't think.
Okay. All righty. Maddie, any other questions on that?
No.
Okay. Last two here. I think we can get these all in and not have to schedule anything else. So as a direct care, this is the availability, nursery availability report / dashboard. So this is what we've been trying to get to the whole time. As a direct care staff member, I need an easy way of identifying nursery availability while completing a phone log. We didn't write a definition of done for this yet, but I have several questions, just like kind of to go over rapid fire, and then we can talk about some of the underlying infrastructure. So how many are allotted to each nursery?
So this kind of varies. So we have our Wentzville location is 10.
Okay.
Our St. Charles location at our main house is 8. Our West location is 4.
Okay.
Our North location is 10.
Okay.
And then our Centene location is 8 on the 2nd floor and 6 on the 1st. However, with Wentzville, St. Charles, and North, they cannot have more than 6 kids under 6 unless they pull in a second overnight staff member. So it's kind of like a weird caveat. Whereas like Centene, their floors are divided by ages, so that's why it's 8 on the one and 6 on the other, and that's always consistent. And West doesn't have enough kids to like go up to 6, so that's why it doesn't matter for them. But so for Wentzville, St. Charles, and North, they can't have more than 6 under 6. With both West and St. Charles, they can apply for a variance to go up in numbers by 1 child.
What does apply for a variance mean?
It means that we write an email to our licensing contact in Jefferson City with the Children's Division, and we request to be able to go up in numbers by an extra child for a specific reason.
And how long is it for like a 24 to 48 hour period, or is it for 6 months?
However long we request. We'll say, no, not like 6 months at a time. It's per family. So we would say like, oh, we had a family call in, we're full for the night, but a mother of an infant is going to be sleeping outside if she doesn't have a place to go. Can we go up by 1 extra child for 48 hours?
Okay.
And then I think Centene can do the same thing on both of their floors. So, but Wentzville and North, I do not think can go up in an extra child.
Okay.
So that just works at St. Charles, West, and Centene.
Okay. That kind of answers my next question in terms of how strict are you guys in going over quota? If you're full but have a family in desperate need, will you still admit? So that's based on your...
It's based on our licensing, but this one gets a little bit tricky too, because if it's during the daytime and we have extra staffing, and so the kids wouldn't be sleeping there, we can potentially go up by an extra 1 or 2 if we know we're going to have discharges by that evening. And like I said, we have the extra staffing. So like there might be in an extreme emergency, a situation where we already have 10 kids at St. Charles, but 3 of them are discharging. And so we're going to bring in a new family of 3 at 10 a.m. because mom needs to go to the hospital right now. So then for 5 or 6 hours, we have 13 kids, but we have an extra staff member there and the kids aren't sleeping there. So it's not like a violation of our licensing contract.
So those numbers that you just gave are bed nights or bed spaces for like,
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So there's a lot of, would you say there's a lot of kind of reading the information that's presented to you and making a trained and educated call on whether or not you can admit it's not hard, fast rules?
Yeah, and it has to be an administrator that approves us to go above like those quotas that are there. So like an administrator would have to approve St. Charles to go up to 13 during the day, or they would have to approve applying for a variance.
Okay.
The other thing is that, unfortunately, the reality of things is that occasionally we have trouble with staffing. So while Winsville has a capacity of 10 children, maybe we just lost somebody that was a full-time person. As we're working to hire that full-time person, we cover some of those shifts with part-timers, but occasionally we might have a 7 to 3 shift with just 1 staff person. So in that case, Winsville can only have 5 kids.
Okay.
So, I mean, there are kind of those random things that happen too.
Okay. So again, it takes a human eye to kind of see these things and make decisions rather than just having something automatically detect if you have an opening or not.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. So I think I know where would you like to see this information? It's on a dashboard. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Everybody should have access to it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then you would do you want just the nursery information, or do you want like the children that are currently at each nursery? So essentially, do you make decisions on admission based on who's at that nursery? So if you have a kid that's rambunctious, you may elect not to go up to your full allotment for a night or something like that. So would you like to see child information? Okay.
It would be nice to see like the child's name with a link to their info, and if they have a critical status, it would be nice to see that like indicated just really small on there. The other thing that would be nice is to have the time that they arrived and their scheduled discharge time.
Okay. Okay, perfect.
So again, with the understanding that like you would never, like at Winsville, I would never set somebody up to come into Centene because it shows that they have a discharge at 3. I would never set somebody up for 4 o'clock. I would always call Centene and say, is your family really discharging at 3? Because we all know things happen and discharge times don't always go through.
Sure. Okay. So do you have an idea about what the ideal way of accessing this dashboard would be? Would it be through a button, or would it be pinned to your home tab, or do you have an idea on what would be best?
I think pinned to the home tab would be great. Currently, this is kind of the resting screen of all the computers. So whenever somebody's not entering things in, like this is what people see.
Okay. Perfect.
So we want it easily accessible.
Okay, so that brings me to my next question. If it's on the home tab and you're also doing a phone log at the same time, do your staff know how to do things like open multiple browser tabs so that they can see both information at once?
Yes, they do that now.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised how many times people will ask us how to do things, and we work in tech, so we generally make recommendations that are maybe second nature to us, like opening things in multiple tabs, and people say that they have no idea how to do that. So that's awesome.
Oh, when we switched to the SharePoint system, we definitely had to do some basic computer support for some of our team members.
Okay.
And anytime we roll out anything new, yeah. I mean, we have varying comfort and skill levels with technology, but that one I think we've got down.
Perfect. All right. Maddie, do you have any additional questions on that one?
No.
All right. Last one, and just so you know, there are some blank definitions of done. We will go through in our design sessions and fill them in, and then we'll just send them to you. If you see any missing information or anything like that, just let us know. We'll be working with you very closely in this sprint, because I think you're going to need to see a lot of the things that we do as we do them, just to give us a thumbs up or hopefully no thumbs downs.
Yeah.
Okay, last one. We can do it in 3 minutes. I'm confident in us. Client record scanning and attachments. As a direct care staff member, I need the ability to scan and attach hard copy documents to a client record so that I can ensure we have attached signatures for documents that we cannot capture electronic signatures on. So the only question I have is, where should documents be attached? Should they be attached only on the parent records, on parents and child records, depending on who the document deals with? Should they be attached on phone logs, or anything like that? I would say, before you enter that, my recommendation is to keep it as consolidated as possible, because if some people attach documents to phone logs, and some people attach it to the parent's record, and some people attach it to the child's record, it's going to be very hard to find. So if you limit the amount of places things can be attached, typically the better. But if you have, for example, if you have things that you only want attached to a child, then we can certainly add it in multiple places.
So this one's a little bit tricky because I think it does have two parts. So the one, and I'll say this super fast and we might have to continue it, but so essentially one of the reasons we wanted this was for those description upon admissions, and those would need to be attached to the child's record.
Perfect.
And we would want those to be associated with a specific admission.
Okay.
The same thing for the developmental assessments, which we would want to scan in, and the medical exams.
Okay.
So for each of those, I don't know if it would be appropriate to have like some place where we're marking like, oh, there were no findings on the medical exam, or we were prescribed medication, and then like there's a scan in record attached to that little piece of info.
Okay. What about parents?
What about what?
Parents. Do you attach any documents that are like parent related?
Yeah, so the only thing we would attach to the parents would be like the sign-offs on the release forms.
Okay.
And then the sign-off on their family support plan that has like their goals and things. And then we have one other form that they sign that basically says that they're going to adhere to nursery policies.
Perfect.
I'm sorry, I missed the other form besides the medical exams. What was the first one before, or the one right before that? Not the description.
The description and then the developmental assessment.
Developmental, thank you.
But with the tricky part is with all of those, we would still need some place in the system that like that information is recorded so that we could report on it easily. So we would want you to be able to click on the scanned copy of the medical exam, but we also want the info from the medical exam, i.e. like medication was prescribed, child had ear infection, to be readily available for reporting.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
All right. I don't have anything else. That was a lot of information.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to digest this information, and then there's a chance we'll have some follow-up questions, but
Sure.
I think like what Jason said, we'll be in touch with you, and I think similar way you added to the status piece, when you have other things to, please let us know and we can add on to this, but this is a good start.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Sorry
Thank you.
meetings are long, but I'm glad we got it all in, and we don't have to necessarily spill over, although we may be reaching out. Hopefully we can handle those conversations via email.
Okay, sounds perfect.
All right. Thanks so much for your time today, Lindsay, and you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.